For this hour's presentation, Charles Radley will be talking about Russian launch costs. And I'd like to just say that I've known Charles as a member of the Cuyahoga Valley Space Society, and through his space activist activities in California. He's an entrepreneur of the first order, and I'm looking forward very much to hearing his comments. And so if you will please welcome Charles Radley.
Okay, thank you very much, because my voice doesn't carry very well. I've been following the space business for many years. I've been an aerospace engineer in one capacity or another for many years. And despite my funny voice, I am a US citizen and I am a patriot. So don't take this the wrong way. But the way I see it, the goal is to create a spacefaring civilization. L5 in 95. Cleveland in 95 or L5 in 95? Well, we didn't make it. Something's got to change. Change is always painful. Problem seems to be high launch costs. Anybody disagree up to this point? Well, yeah? Politics is money.
Talk about that later.
The problem is high launch costs. So the plan is to reduce launch costs. How do we do that? Well, most people are talking about massive investments in Delta Clippers and reusable launch systems. We had the shuttle, which was a massive investment but did not seem to reduce launch costs. I went to the 83 L5 conference when the shuttle was just coming online, and we were all saying L5 and 95 with the shuttle. Didn't happen. And I'm a little worried about Delta Clipper. I seem to, although I'm very supportive of it, I'm a little skeptical of the things that don't exist. So the problem seems to be we need a massive investment in new launch vehicles to bring down the cost. Is that what I'm hearing? So the holy grail would appear to be a massive reduction in launch costs with zero upfront investment. That sounds like a good idea, doesn't it? The holy grail exists. By Russian CI. Now I put in a number of 4 there, which I kind of picked out of the air. Russian CIS launches are 4 times cheaper today with no investment cost. It's negotiable. And there are many different launch vehicles of different sizes and different orbits, and the price structures vary quite a lot, so you can't pick a simple number like that. And it depends on your mission, depends on the number of launches, the size of your payload, but it's substantially less for most types of missions. There are some missions that the Russians just can't do. So what's stopping us? Well, we're stopping ourselves. The US government does not permit open commercial use of cheap launch vehicles from the Commonwealth of Independent States or the People's Republic of China. Why? To protect high-priced US and French launch vehicles, manufacturers. Now, is that really the objective?
No.
Not my objective. My objective is L5 and 95. I have no problem with, US. I'm not trying to destroy the US aerospace industry. It's my living. And I'll come on to explain why I think that trying to protect the US launch vehicle industry is exactly the opposite of what we need to be doing, because it's not the aerospace industry of the future. I hope I have these charts in the right order. Okay, yes, here's the next one. Russian launch costs, why so cheap? There are a number of reasons. It's very interesting to analyze the reasons, and people disagree about the reasons as well. But here are a few things that I know are true. A PhD engineer in Russia typically makes about $300 a month if he makes anything as an aerospace engineer, because a lot of them haven't been getting their paychecks. By the way, how many people here have email? Okay. How many people have been talking to Russians by email? I do it every day, and they tell me how much they get paid. And some of them speak pretty good English. Some of them communicate by email better than by voice because they don't actually speak English very well, but they can write it pretty well. And they're out there and they're quite talkative. And I've gotten quite friendly with some of them. Another aspect of the Russian infrastructure is they have a fully amortized infrastructure. In fact, it's probably too amortized and it's decaying. But there's no investment cost except, in a way, investment you could regard as really a maintenance cost. They're running low on their maintenance. The other issue, of course, was their phenomenally high launch rate. Economies of scale. If you get your launch rate up, then your marginal unit costs go down, or at least your marginal unit cost diminishes relative to the upfront cost. I'm not an economist, so I can't express this mathematically. Right now, Russian launch rates are declining. They're way down on their peak, but in a way that's promising, because if their launch rates could go up, their costs might go down even more. Well, I've tried making these points with various people. I get various arguments thrown back at me. One argument is, well, the Russians are cheap today, but that's not always going to be the case. And if we get to be dependent on them, then they're going to jack the price up, and boy, then we'll be in trouble. That might happen. I kind of doubt it. The way I respond to that argument is like this. Costs in Russia are rising in certain sectors. Costs in Russia will rise in general, but in the aerospace industry, I don't think they'll rise very much, and they won't rise very quickly in real terms. Again, I'm not an economist, but simplistically, it seems to me that real wages can't rise faster than your real growth in GDP, or gross domestic product. The last 15 years, the Russian GDP has been declining. And people say, well, costs are rising. And yet, well, costs are rising in Russia in their local ruble currency, which is devaluating faster than the rate of inflation. Actually, inflation has started dropping in Russia. It's now down to, I believe it was 6% last month, which is remarkably good compared to what it's at, 6% per month, not per year. It was running in the range of 10 to 20% per month for the last several years. There is a lot of optimism that the money supply in Russia is finally getting under control, and that the inflation rate may stay in the single figure per month range for the rest of the year. And I've seen reports from Voice of America and so forth that this year or next year might be the year in which the Russian economy bottoms out and starts growing. That's the first time I've been hearing that for several years. But real cost and wages can't rise really any faster than the real wealth of the country, which just hasn't been growing historically recently in Russia. Some sectors of the Russian economy are growing, for example, banking, real estate, consumer goods, all the capitalistic things that they're trying to develop. We're trying to demilitarize that country, get them to convert from military production to commercial production. And yes, people working in these kind of industries are making more than they used to make. Those salaries are growing somewhat, and a lot of people are leaving the aerospace industry to work in these other industries which are making more money. But that doesn't seem to be happening in the Russian aerospace sector. They are shrinking, many layoffs, much worse than in the US, and it's bad enough here. Wages are falling. In fact, some of them are just not getting paid. For reasons that are not entirely clear. and there are a lot of discussions on that point. So again, I look at this very simplistically, and I'm not trying to go into a big economical argument, but let's say, okay, the Russian economy bottoms out this year, and let's say it starts expanding at the rate of 10% per year from here on out, which isn't going to happen. But if I did the numbers, and if you start out at $300 a month, to get up to a US type level would take 40 years. So I don't think real costs in Russia are going to rise very quickly, at least in the aerospace sector. A few examples. These are figures I sort of plucked out of the air somewhat. I didn't research them in a lot of detail, but the ballpark to give you an idea of just how much cheaper things are in Russia than they are here. Space Station Freedom, a couple of years ago when it was being de-scoped, various options were floated for Congress. Alpha 1, Beta 1, I forget the exact names. And one of them involved a Lockheed concept based on their Bus 1 module. And somebody here may have a better figure, but as I recall, the figure for the Bus 1 was around $1.5 billion. And at the time, shortly after that, the Clinton administration wanted some cooperation with the Russians, and the Russians offered their FGB tug module based on their rather interesting spacecraft, the identity of which was not really made clear until a couple of years ago. It was a military manned spacecraft that never actually flew with a crew, and it's declassified now as TKS. And they were docked up to the Salyut 1. So they've flown many times over the last several years, and it seemed to be about the same size, shape, performance, and capabilities as the Bus 1 for a price tag of what today is about $400 million. I think at the time they were quoting quite a bit less than that, and it's going up. They've succeeded in negotiating the price up, but it's still quite a good deal. And I guess it's interesting that Lockheed is actually now buying that on behalf of NASA instead of building their own Bus 1 through actually to LKE, Lockheed Clearance Energy. And then again, it's very difficult to draw direct comparisons, but to give us an approximate comparison, I pulled out some rather old figures for Proton from Russia, Ariane 5 and Titan 4. Similar payload capacity, very different prices. Titan 4, I'm not sure what year these, I think these are like $89. Like, I haven't researched the exact year which these figures come from. The Titan 4 basic version has been running around 315 million. It's flown at least 3 times. It may have flown more by now. I haven't been following it. And the Ariane 5, which doesn't exist, they claim is going to cost 105 million. And Proton, which has flown about 190 times, prices vary. 35 to 70 million dollars is probably what the Russians would accept for a one-off flight, except they're not allowed to charge that way by the treaty. Numbers in a little more detail. Again, these are actually, I'll admit it, I pulled these out. Is Josh Hopkins here? They came out of the Usenet frequently asked questions file, which is, so they're a little bit old, but you see the capabilities to LEO and GTO, low Earth orbit and geosynchronous transfer orbit, and the prices. Proton has a larger capability to LEO than the other two, but has less capability to GTO than the other two because of their unfavorable launch site in Baikonur. And from Plesetsk it's even worse, Plesetsk in the north. And the Ariane prices are based on the launch site from Guyana, I imagine. And Titan from Polar launch is probably from Vandenberg, which is a very good site, and Eastern launch is from Canaveral. But, I mean, if you look at the difference between Titan 4 and Proton, I mean, you know, you're talking about an order of magnitude, at least a low Earth orbit. And you can pick almost any triplet of launch vehicles from the Ariane family, the US family, and the former Soviet family, and you get about the same kind of comparison. Let's take the Ariane 4, comparing with Titan 3, comparing with Zenith, which again is difficult to make those kind of comparisons, but in this case the Zenith looks like it's about a factor of 3 cheaper than a Titan 3. Here's some more politically incorrect opinions. The USA leads in payloads but lags in launchers. What I mean by that is the US has the vast majority of and I'm talking strictly commercial here. I'm not talking US government customers or mission. In the purely commercial arena, the international telecommunications market primarily, the US companies build most of the spacecraft, the overwhelming majority, but they don't launch them to the same extent. Here's an opinion. Access to cheap Russian and Chinese launchers will dramatically boost the lucrative US payload industry. It would be a dramatic net benefit to the USA economy. And again, picking some numbers out of the air, as an order of magnitude, the commercial launch vehicle industry to US companies is probably worth $1 billion a year. Actually, I think it's a lot less than that, because most of the launch business is to Ariane. But we could easily get $10 billion a year increase in payload business. This all depends on market elasticity and things like that, and how quickly the manufacturers will respond to the lower launch prices, and how confident the customers will be that the prices will stay low, etc., etc. This is good for America. I'm not trying to hurt America by saying we should give away all our launch business. I think it's a win-win scenario. It will help the Russians and it will help the US economy. Losers will be Ariane. Oh well. The USA can leverage its payload industry using cheap Russian launchers. You notice I don't say much about Chinese launches. I'll touch on that later. All we have to do is tear up a piece of paper. For those who might not know about the restrictions on US launch, on the Russian launch vehicles, it basically goes like this. In October '93, there was an agreement between the USA and Russia signed at the Vice President and Prime Minister level. Attorneys argue about whether that was a treaty or not. Treaties have to be ratified by the Senate. This was never presented to the Senate. So it's some kind of a piece of paper, it's a trade agreement that says that it allows, quote unquote, allows Russia to launch 2 commercial satellites per year to geosynchronous orbit until I think it's year 2000. And there were various interpretations to that. I think the Russians were allowed to have 2 satellites per launch. The agreement said nothing about low Earth orbit launches. You can either interpret that to mean there's no limit or that none are allowed. I've heard it argued both ways. They simply was the people who wrote the agreement didn't think about all the little LEOs and the big LEO proposals that are out there. And that was part of a package where that was part of the same agreement which authorized the space station cooperation. So as an initial agreement, it was the Russians agreed to it apparently because 2 launches per year is better than 0, which was the previous agreement under the COCOM, Cold War restrictions. And they were given a very lucrative deal on providing the FGB tug. This agreement also was authorized the Russians to provide the FGB tug module for Space Station Alpha for a couple of $100 million or something more than that now. The other strange thing about this agreement, this is an unenforceable provision, but it says that the Russian prices, I think the number is 7%, the Russian prices must be 7% of US Western prices, whatever those are. I mean, Western prices are very often they're secret. They're not announced because they're not government contracts generally, they're private companies launching commercial satellite. I don't know how, in good faith, I don't know how you could comply with that. If you were trying to get around it, I would think it'd be fairly easy to get around it. But that's similar to the agreement between the USA and China, which goes back some years. China was given permission to launch Western satellites before the US by several years. The primary beneficiary seems to be Ariane, because Ariane is the vehicle of choice for commercial users. It is generally cheaper than US launch vehicles. Right now the Ariane manifest is backlogged, so people use US vehicles because they can't get slots on Ariane. That's a cynic's view, I suppose. If anyone here from General Dynamics or Modern Ariane would probably have variations on that opinion, but I come out of the payload industry. I have to admit, I was an years ago, an ex-employee of Hughes Aircraft and British Aerospace working on comsats. So I kind of had that perspective. 60% of all the world's commercial satellite business is on Ariane. 50s, 55, 60%, something like that. It varies from year to year. Why is the US promoting the Ariane launch vehicle industry? This is a bad deal. Very simple arguments. All these issues are more complex than how I'm presenting them here, I agree. But these are points that are not presented very often. About 90% of the world's commercial satellites are made in the USA. 85, 75, 90, it varies from year to year. The payload business per launch is 2 to 3 times the launcher value. You typically put a $100 million satellite on a $50 million rocket, that sort of order. And then if you factor in the ground systems and the added on value-added services in the ground segment, you can get a factor of 10 on that. And the US, again, is very good in that area. So communication satellites are an enabling technology. I might add a few comments on foreign policy considerations, human rights. Personal opinions, we should reward Russia for their improvements in human rights over the last 15 years. May have taken a step back recently, but they've certainly made a great deal of progress if you look at it over the 10 to 15 year time frame. Nuclear proliferation. Russia's selling nuclear reactors to Iran. Isn't that good? Well, they need the money. How about this? I haven't seen anybody propose this idea. I proposed on the internet, nobody responded. Offer to remove launch restrictions in exchange for canceling nuclear reactor deals. It's an idea. About the same dollar value. Friendship through commerce. You know, I talk to Russians every day by internet. They're ordinary people, somewhat different in outlook to Westerners. They have not been allowed to talk to foreigners for most of their lives. It's very exciting for them to be able to talk to foreigners through the internet and other ways. I found them pretty reasonable to deal with. I've engaged in a little bit of minor commerce with them, buying some books and videos and so forth, and they've been very helpful. And I think there's a lot of it's a good way to improve relations between the U.S. and Russia through commerce. We get to understand each other, how we do business. I think it will resolve a lot of the tensions in the world. The alternatives are unpleasant. Commerce with Russia will improve their economy and stabilize their country and promote democracy. Again, the alternatives are unpleasant. So I think we really should be doing these things. My last slide of this presentation is I presented an argument for saying that the case for removing Russian launch vehicle restrictions is overwhelming. 30 minutes. At this point, there were a couple of things I could do. I have some videos. I've got a couple more charts I want to show. Just pretty pictures of Russian rockets. This last start. 12:30 as well. Okay. One of the design bureaus in Russia that doesn't get talked about a lot is ASA Polyot in Omsk, Siberia. I've never been there. I've never been to Russia, I must admit. I talked to them by electronic means and other means. But I have a friend in England who knows those guys and gave me one of their brochures. Polyot, for example, is a huge enterprise with about 20,000 employees out in the wild of Siberia. They make this aircraft. I forget the name of it, but it's a Arctic patrol aircraft with the engines mounted above the wing so that the snow spray doesn't cause too many problems, and I've seen videos of it landing on ice and things like that, and that's for sale. They make the thing, they make the smallest, one of the smallest operational launch vehicles. It's the smallest one available to the former Soviet Union, the Cosmos SL8, according to the Sheldon designation. I think they call it the RK-14 or something. It's about 1,500 kilos, the low Earth orbit. And it was the vehicle that launched the first American satellite on a Russian vehicle, the FISAT, which was launched at the beginning of this year from Plesetsk, and bipropellant, the engines. I had some free coupons for some color Xeroxes, so I need some of these. Here's a trivia question for you. It doesn't look so good in that color, but of the two main Russian launch sites, or Soviet launch sites, which one do you think that is? Actually, it's greener than that. It's Plesetsk. And you can tell that because it's from conifer trees. Actually, on the original, it's quite green, but it doesn't transmit very well. Yes, Baikonur is all orange and brown. No, this is not an SS-25. This is again the Cosmos SL8. I forget which ICBM it's derived from. It's the vertical sounding rocket, and a number of ICBMs are part of that family. And it was used for a lot of ballistic suborbital tests. And those little Spiral space plane, unmanned space planes that they launched into the Indian Ocean flew on these. It's flown about 400 times. It's fairly reliable. It's had a very high reliability record. That's a launch of, I think that's one of the Intercosmos launches. Doesn't project very well, but that's an upper stage. Bright red nose cone. Okay, those were all the slides I have of that. As for videos, I don't know if you want to sit here and watch those. I've got several videos which I bought from Video Cosmos in Moscow. Mostly the soundtracks are in Russian. Anybody here speak Russian? I don't speak enough to be able to translate it. There's the launch of energy of Iran. Izvinice. My apologies. I have one on Proton, which is a marketing video from Glabs Cosmos, that's in English. And what I kind of like, I might show this for about 5 or 10 minutes. It's a sort of a day in the life of a cosmonaut. It's not Vladimir Titov, but the other fellow, Strekalov. I think he's up there now. The one who punched out on the when the rocket exploded. Got that. That's on this tape. Well, I can try and commentate a little bit. Mediums longer than I remember. Okay, that's the logo for NPO Energy or Video Cosmos. And do this on behalf of NPO Energy. Okay, this tape is to give you an idea of the process to be trained as a cosmonaut. It's the control center Kaliningrad, the typical recovery in Kazakhstan. Most of the recovery shots shown are for the Japanese journalist that flew, whose name I can't pronounce. So it is rumored. There he is. I don't know if you can see okay. That's one of the Mir modules, I don't know which one. Sputnik won the world's first satellite, or a replica of it. I guess that's the lunar lander that never flew in manned. No, what was that? Or tested the landing. Standard procedure for each cosmonaut stands up when he's told, they're told the results of their training as to whether they qualify to fly or not, and they have to stand to be informed that they passed the test. It's a ritual that they do. And then another ritual is they salute before they get on the bus to go to the launch pad.
They have lots of customs and rituals around their flights, much more
Right,
than we do.
absolutely. Soyuz, SL-7.
They seem to be pretty careful.
Shot from Mir. There's a few Mir shots. Separation, I don't know if that's a Progress or a Soyuz.
Resupply bin.
Probably a Progress resupply bin.
Yeah.
That system has been retrofitted, the capability to turn off the engines on the first stage if they wanted to stop. They had fire when they couldn't.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of it.
Yes.
What's that?
I guess that's Mir as seen from Progress. From Soyuz. During a docking. You see that thrusters firing and the recovery. Well, that's a 0GIL-76 training aircraft. Underwater training facilities. Survival training. I think a lot of these shots are Strekalov, the cosmonaut featured in this show. I guess that's your typical X with a parachute for the helicopters to find you. No, I don't think so. They do the cosmonaut living quarters in the spacecraft assembly building.
When they get ready for flight, it's the same building. They're assembling these things.
How do you mean get ready for
They have some
flight?
offices there. I don't think that's, they stay at the hotel by building. Yeah,
Right.
ready
I
building.
mean, it takes 18 months to get ready for flight in a number of facilities. Okay, here we are. This is it was a night launch countdown, and the vehicle caught fire and exploded. And the two, Titov and Strekalov, the range safety officer tried to hit the escape rocket button. The wire had burned through. The crew hit the manual button. They were informed that their vehicle was on fire and that they should punch out. I guess through radio link. And they punched out just in time. Through the escape rockets that separate the Soyuz capsule from the third stage. And pulled a considerable acceleration, I think it's about 10 Gs for a few seconds. And they landed a few miles away. And here's some shots that show you how that system works. After the escape rockets fire, these canards come out to decelerate the stack, and the capsule then tumbling like crazy comes out, fires out the parachutes, and the parachutes deploy and brake it for landing.
Did they come out of that pretty much unharmed?
I believe they walked away from it.
Parachute technology, that's
Then there's a couple more minutes of internal shots, so I guess these are simulators. Anyway, that was the reason I bought the tape. I wanted the shot of them punching out. But
When did that happen?
don't remember exactly yet. Around 89, sometime around there.
Early 80s.
Late 80s.
At 18 or 17, they called it.
Yeah, it didn't get a number. 17A or.
How much did you sell that ride for?
Excuse me?
Do you remember how much they were offering to sell the ticket to John Denver for? Was it 10
He didn't tell me, but I think it was about 10 million. That's about the going rate. I think people that want to fly the near should take advantage of the opportunity sooner rather than later, because the opportunity may not be available beyond 97, 8, 98 time frame.
I got an informal quotation, I don't know how accurate it is, that 1 million would fly.
Well, again, yeah. Thanks, Mike. Good to see you, Mike. The prices are negotiable. I have learned, I am not the world's greatest negotiator. I am a sucker. But I have succeeded in negotiating with various friends in Russia. It's amazing. It's funny. I'm learning a lot about psychology. There is, depends who you're talking to, how you do it, how you phrase it, and what kind of a rapport and relationship you build up with key individuals. When it comes right down to it, if they like you, they'll give you a good deal. If they don't like you, they'll try and extract the most they can get. They're rather emotional people, and it comes across in the way they do business. Irene Shalan will be talking this afternoon about the culture of dealing with Russian people. She is Russian herself, and I highly recommend her talk.
Are you open to questions?
Yes, we might as well. At this point, let me turn the sound down. Is this just music and talk? Yes, okay, so far away.
Okay, well, on the matter of cost in general, how do you reply to the argument made that, well, granted, if we were to lift the price restriction under the 7% or so, regardless of what their cost might be, what might be the price? And the answer, it might be whatever the market would bear, contract or no contract. How do you answer that argument, which I'm sure you've heard many times?
Well, the issue of to make contracts in Russia is a different question. And how will they price their launches? We won't know until we try it and do it, I guess. But it depends on the mood of the day somewhat, and how one projects the future as getting better or getting worse. I suppose if you think the future is going to get better, you might price it low to attract the customers, and then maybe slowly settle up to a market level. If you think that the bottom's going to fall out of the market in the near future, you probably price it high to try and collect as much as you can before everything closes down. Psychology about how you see the future going. The kind of thing I would see happening would be like packages, the sort of thing that happens in the Western market, where you buy blocks of 10 launches at a discounted rate, which is always cheaper than buying one launch. So, so you promise to buy 10 launches and you pay for one, and then you argue about the other 9 and when you're going to pay for those. And, the contracts lawyers are much better than me at those kinds of things. But in general, you keep in mind what the real costs are. But the best way, in my opinion, one thing to keep in mind when dealing with the Russians is you have to get good information about what the costs really are. Because I found, I guess I won't be specific, but I was in a situation where a guy in Russia was wanting to charge me a certain price. He'd originally quoted me a price for something. It wasn't very much. It was for a retail product, and it needed to be adapted for the U.S. market. He was quoting me a good price for a package, and then one day he said the cost for the adaptation had gone up astronomically to a price which was much higher than I could get it done here. So I said, well, don't bother to adapt it, I'll adapt it here. And then a few days later he said, well, they decided to reduce the price for the adaptation to exactly the same as what I was quoting. Do shop around, do your comparisons, do your research, find out from independent sources how much things really cost, and then go in and negotiate. Tell them that, I know it doesn't cost that much and I'm not going to pay you for it that much. Standard. But you've got to be prepared.
Bizarre trading.
Yes. Alan?
I was going to say that whatever price they're going to charge is going to be cheaper carry out.
Well, yes, I mean, I think so. Labor rates in Europe are slightly lower than in the U.S., generally, depending on which country. Labor rates in Britain are a lot lower than in the U.S. I can certainly testify to that. But labor rates in Russia are even lower still.
Well, but it's also the design of the vehicle.
And there's other...
They take care of the man hours, but you have a proton.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Yes, that's quite true. I'd only, and that surprised me, because you think that in many cases the Russian industry is much less automated than in the West. But this is an area where they seem to be even more automated than the West. Their launch sites, the Baikonur, the number of people they have running Baikonur is far less than in U.S. launch sites. I've heard cynics say that's because the weather is nice in Florida and lots of people want to live and work there, and the weather in Kazakhstan is not so great and not that many people want to go there. I've heard cynics say that. Yes, sir.
So you want to comment about China?
Oh, China, yes, that's the issue of human rights. That bothers me a great deal. I don't know what to do about it, but I do feel that since Russia is doing so much better in human rights than China, we should recognize that. Excuse me?
I'm sorry, do you think Germany can exercise any influence on ESA and kill the Russian launch vehicles? Or is ESA going to do
No, I don't think so. No, it's because, I mean, they can try, would they want to? They may. ESA France put up most of the money for Ariane, and France is the biggest advocate for it. And the whole of Europe, everybody in Europe is bought into Ariane to some extent. We take this gentleman.
Okay, I think I read a little bit a while ago, maybe you can shed more insight on it, that Lockheed had brought into Proton, like maybe a certain percentage of it or something like that, and if so, do you think that it might be a good meeting of interest perhaps for the U.S. commercial industry to try to get some of their own efforts going by sort of taking the shortcut through the already existing Russian infrastructure technology?
Yes, thank you. I know that. Thank you for raising that. Yes, I forgot to mention that. It's a very good point. What you're referring to is LKE, a joint venture company, Lockheed Krunichev Energia. It's not Lockheed, it's not Krunichev, it's not Energia. It is a joint venture of the three combined. I don't know the numbers, but it's mostly financed by Lockheed, presumably on company funds. I don't know if they're getting direct government funds. I'm sure they're making a lot of use of the aid programs like Export-Import Bank, etc., to guarantee loans, etc. I know the Europeans did that when they bought a Proton launch. They used Export-Import Bank to guarantee that contract, which was the first time it was done. A lot of controversy about that because the French said they should have been using Ariane, if I recall. That was the first one, and one of the biggest, LKE. Lockheed's putting a lot of money into building facilities at Baikonur in Kazakhstan because the Russians don't really use clean rooms at all for their spacecraft, whereas US-made spacecraft have very high cleanliness standards, so they're building a whole new assembly building, they're building satellite telecommunication links, Western-style living accommodations, and that's part of a package where Lockheed is going to be marketing those vehicles in the West. They've already got customers for a number of them, and I guess they're pretty close to filling up the quota for 2 a year for the rest of the decade. And there are some other ventures like that. Lockmart, formerly General Dynamics, buying Russian engines for a future Atlas vehicle. And Boeing is doing a joint venture with the Ukrainians to launch Zeniths from a ship, an oil rig or something. I recall that's something fairly recent. Yeah, and that's definitely a way to go. And my greatest respect for companies that are willing to do those types of deals, because it's very difficult, very risky area to deal with, working with the Russians. Very complicated politics, very difficult legal system. The laws change there every day. Plus, the court system doesn't work the way our court system does. And therefore, there are things that one can discuss offline.
Is anyone dealing with these people? Have you ever back out after the line so pull something
there's a lot of suspicion, but because people are trying to do relatively big deals and they've had no prior experience with dealing with each other, there's a lot of nervousness, which I feel myself, and everybody feels it when they do deals with the Russians. And so it is a definite art to make those deals work. They can be made to work. But yeah, contracts don't work quite the same way over there as they do here. I know there are a number of cases where people sign a contract with a Russian company and then they find that, well, there's certainly the perception that one side or the other are trying to back out of it. And the other side, of course, claims that it was a misunderstanding and they never really intended that in the first place. Sometimes that's true, sometimes that's questionable.
Charles, I'll talk about that tonight when I speak.
I'll be very interested to hear that. There are cases, certainly our NASA's finding that dealing with the Russian people, they've signed these protocols at meetings, and then a month or two later they want to change all the delivery dates. And then they said, well, they're not really going to provide what they said they would provide. And it happens, yeah. But I would say that I know Russians have the perspective coming the other way. The Russians are very nervous dealing with very experienced, very skilled Western businessmen. They do feel at a disadvantage when they're in those kind of situations. And sometimes they inadvertently agree to things that they didn't really know they were agreeing to. And sometimes there's deliberate deception involved, but that's not quite as common as people think.
Charles, let me say that to the audience that I was in Moscow extensively at very high levels with the United States, and I want to say that his remarks to us today are very well taken, with one or two exceptions, which I'll address tonight. I hope he will converse with me on it. I think his remarks concerning U.S.-Soviet relations in outer space were very, very telling and excellent.
With that, I'd like to go to the